Welcome to the Covered Bridges of New Hampshire podcast, where we discuss all things related to covered bridges in the Granite State. Here's your host, Kim Chandler.
Hello, Covered Bridge people, and welcome to the podcast. In this episode, we're talking with bridgewright Tim Andrews of Barns and Bridges of New England about his work on the Ashuelot Covered Bridge in Winchester. This project won the first Palladio Award for covered bridges in 2003. Join Tim and I as he shares details about the work and interesting things they uncovered during this project. Here we go. In this episode, we will learn about the 1999 rehabilitation of the Ashuelot Covered Bridge in Winchester. Built in 1864, the Ashuelot Bridge is the southernmost covered bridge in New Hampshire. The 174-foot, two-span Town Trust Bridge spans the Ashuelot River and was originally constructed to connect Ashuelot Village to the train station on the other side of the river. The Ashuelot Bridge is considered one of the most elaborate covered bridges in the state. Today we're talking with bridgewright Tim Andrews of Guilford. Andrews owns and operates Barns and Bridges of New England. He specializes in the restoration, design, and construction of covered bridges, as well as timber frame construction, timber trusses, jacking and rigging, and no-char fire preventer application. In addition to the Ashuelot Bridge project, Andrews has worked on several New Hampshire covered bridges, including the Sillyville Bog, Kentucky Railroad, Corbin, Coombs, Mount Orne, and Whittier bridges, and he built the Tannery Hill Bridge in Guilford in 1995, assisting the Guilford Rotary Club in its endeavor to provide the town with a safe crossing and access to the town municipal buildings. Tim has also worked on restoring covered bridges in Maine, Vermont, Maryland, Kentucky, and California. Welcome to the podcast, Tim.
Hi, Kim. How are you? Thank you.
Good. How are you? Thank you for talking with me today about one of the most beautiful covered bridges in the state of New Hampshire, the Ashuelot Bridge.
Yeah, I mean, when it first came out to bid, I said, I just got to go after this thing. Kind of put, things to peril and say, keep your margins close, your profits close. Because I just had to do it. It's such a beautiful bridge.
It is. It is. In 1998, an inspection of the Ashuelot Bridge by Hoyle Tanner and Associates showed that the bridge really needed some work. In fact, the rating had been reduced from 6 tons to 3 tons. Can you walk us through the condition of the bridge?
Yeah, past decades, the bridge had been overloaded. So many of the floor joists supporting the roadway had cracked, had been sistered and other timber put alongside, and they were really showing their age. Structurally, the biggest challenge was at the pier, because like you mentioned in your intro, it's a 2-span bridge, but it's a single bridge in 2 spans. So try not to get too heady with the engineering aspect. It's
Right.
like a teeter-totter.
Mm-hmm.
So when a bridge goes over a pier and it's continuous over the pier, it's working doubly hard when loads go over it or when snow's loaded on the roof. So there's a whole bunch of crushing and broken timbers right at the pier. So that was a structural deficiency that Hoyle Tanner was most focused on.
Okay. And the initial bid for the work at the time was $667,000, which seems inexpensive, but...
Yeah, well, it was inexpensive.
Yeah.
Compared to today's bids, which
I
go,
know.
$1.5 million to $2.5 million.
Exactly. And I know a lot of the funding came from the New Hampshire State Bridge Aid Program. Can you tell us a little bit about that program and how that funding works?
Yeah, New Hampshire's got a great program. So in this particular instance, as with many towns or cities that own the bridges exclusively, they're not on a state highway, the state will fund 80% of the repair work, with the town providing a 20% match. That enables the town to select their own engineer, manage the project, and ultimately get reimbursed for the work. So it's a great program. It's not just for covered bridges. It works for concrete and steel bridges.
And towns will sometimes use the money from their own tax base, but sometimes they'll do fundraising as well to raise that extra 20%. Do you know if Winchester had a fundraising effort for that bridge, or did they?
They were two-pronged. They had a private fundraising effort that was continued for several years, and then the town ended up taking that donation and then coming up with the rest of the match.
Great. And how does the bidding process work when there are state agencies involved with funding?
Well, the normal way of how they begin the whole process of restoring a covered bridge is that the town or the state, depending on the owner, will solicit interest from engineering firms. So there's a call for quotations. Uh, the engineers would submit their qualifications, and then they would negotiate a price from the engineer. The next phase in the normal process is bid. Everything goes to bid. So the engineers develop a bid document with plans and specifications and monetary requirements, etc. And then from the bid process, it goes to construction. So it's design, bid, build is the normal approach.
Mm-hmm.
What I like to see, because covered bridges are such, they're an education. So you'd like to have contractors bidding the job that have experience with it, as well as engineers. So the other way they can go about it is do a design build, where a team, an engineer and a builder team together to put forth a proposal for the restoration of a covered bridge.
And is that the process that happened here?
No, this was a design, bid, build.
Bid,
Yep.
build. Okay, right. Well, and I guess that makes sense because it seems like the engineering firm will be involved in the process as well, correct?
Yes. Yep.
The project paid particular attention to rehabilitating the bridge using standards designed to preserve its historic integrity and employing the same wood and methods used by the original builders. Can you tell us a little bit about those standards?
As with any historical property, and Ashuelot was identified and listed on National Register of Historic Places.
Mm-hmm.
So you use the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. And it's a series of guidelines and some recommendations, some adverse things you can do to any particular historic project. So you apply those standards basically in design. So it's the engineer is just charged with trying to maintain with rehabilitation standards as they go through the process of the structural, modifications to the bridge.
Okay.
Materials are all you're supposed to try to match in kind. On this particular project, the bridge was originally built largely of old growth eastern white pine and of the quality that you just can't find today. So the engineers specified Douglas fir from the West Coast because it met the strength requirements of the bridge.
And part of keeping to those standards resulted in you took off 2 non-original features to the bridge. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, in a separate contract that ran concurrent with our work, for years a water line was encased on the upstream walkway of the bridge, and it had shown signs of stress and leaking and freezing over the years. So again, as a separate contract, the plan was to remove the water line from the bridge and put it below the river bed adjacent to the bridge, which really helps simplify the load that the bridge has to carry. I mean, it was a 10-inch water pipe, and that's full of water. That's a lot of load on one side of the bridge that otherwise could be used to support a vehicle.
Right.
So that was removed, and it opened up the upstream walkway to where it was safe for pedestrians to use it, because this boxed-in pipe made the walking area so narrow, it just wasn't safe.
Right. And there was a handrail on the bridge as well, correct?
Yes, at some point, and I don't know who put in a standard 2x4 above the historic handrail, up about 48 inches. But a beautiful existing handrail was somewhere down around 36 inches. So I had petitioned the engineer to remove it because it was an addition, non-historic addition to the bridge. Mm-hmm. It looked ghastly, so visually it just didn't play in with everything. And so that was submitted to the town, and the town actually asked their insurance company if they would still insure the bridge if that upper rail had been removed. And they came back and quote unquote said, if somebody falls off the bridge, we're going to pay one way or the other. Doesn't matter how high the handrail is. So the modern handrail that was placed there was reversed back to its original configuration. Another important feature if you're going to try to meet the standards.
And when you took the water line out, you found something in the bridge. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, there was at some point the fire had established itself inside of that wooden box, and it was hidden from sight. So we had additional structural work to do there because the bottom cord was pretty heavily charred, about mid span on one of the upstream bottom cords. So it was good that the water line was leaving.
Right. And do you think that was arson?
It could have been arson or attempted arson. It could have been kids playing with firecrackers. Who know? Fireworks.
Right.
Who knows? Who knows?
Right. Well, and it sounds like they just built over it. They didn't.
Yeah, they built over or the fire was contained within the box and fortunately got smothered for lack of oxygen.
Right. I know when you're using the Secretary of the Interior standards to work on covered bridges, you obviously want to keep as much original wood as you possibly can, but sometimes that wood has been rotted, especially maybe on the roof or on the decking. So what percentage of original wood were you able to keep, and why is that important with covered bridges?
Well, if I can give you a subset into that about retaining historic material, we have to keep in mind that today's roof and today's floor, I call it a floor, engineers call it a deck, they've been replenished and replaced many times.
Mm-hmm.
So those aspects of the bridge, while important, are no longer historically significant because it's not the original.
Mm-hmm.
What is important are the trusses and the upper connecting members, and sometimes you get lucky and the floor beams or floor joists are original. Those are the monuments of a covered bridge. They're supporting the weight, and those are the elements that you don't want to invade too heavily. So the flooring, it wears away. That's probably the floor we put down, which was new, was probably the 10th or 12th floor that bridge has seen since it was originally built.
Okay.
The roof was a metal modern roof. I'll bet there were traces of a wood shingle roof from long ago above it, but those are wear items, so they're expected to wear away. But the trusses themselves and the connecting members are the true monuments. And of that, we saved about 85% of.
That's a lot. And you mentioned sistering. Is that common in bridges to try to save the original timbers, or is that a different process?
Well, it's not really advised because it changes the nature of the bridge because it's not only just the wood, it's the spatial relationship. There's a mouthful for you. But it's about the geometry. It's about the visual aspects of the bridge is equally important. The sistering I was referring to is some floor joists had been broken, and as a stopgap measure, they sistered timbers alongside to keep the bridge open.
Okay.
We replaced all the floor joists in this bridge. It was time to replace them.
Trunnels come up a lot when I talk to people about covered bridges because sometimes it's spelled the way it should be spelled, tree nails, but it's pronounced in New England trunnels. And I know that bridge had quite a few trunnels, and you worked pretty hard on replacing them. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, a town lattice is two things: flat plank timber and big round wooden pegs, technically trunnels. A tree nail. Tree nails actually comes from German. It's about a 600-year-old phrase because they are trees to make nails. Nobody knows for sure how trunnel came out of tree nails, but like you said, it's a New England tradition. So I was fortunate enough to pick up an antique trunnel lathe from the Gamage shipyard up in Bristol, Maine, because trunnels are also used to put wooden plank on the outside of a wooden vessel. They had used it for 4 decades to build traditional wooden boats, and I was lucky enough to score the trunnel lathe. So every trunnel that we replaced, we turned on site. We actually fabricated and made them right on site to fit that particular hole. Because people don't think so, but a too loose trunnel to too tight trunnel is only about 4/100ths of an inch difference. You make them too big, they end up being a splitting wedge. You make them too loose, and they're not working the way they're supposed to. So all in all, I think we replaced about 800 trunnels.
Wow. And you had to cut every single one to size.
Yep, that's correct.
Wow. I have one of those trunnels.
You do.
I do. I do. You applied no char fire retardant sealer to the bridge. Can you talk about that product and why it's very important for covered bridges?
Okay, well, that particular product that was used on the Ashuelot Bridge, because the Ashuelot Bridge was originally all painted white,
Mm-hmm.
but a sister product that has the proprietary ingredients of no char is S320, which is more like a paint medium. No char in and of itself is clear, it's waterborne, and most importantly, for historic purposes, once you apply it, it doesn't change the appearance of the wood. So if you were to visit me on a bridge on a Monday and I said, I'm going to spray the bridge and have it done by Friday, you'd come out on Saturday and call me a liar because you can't see any difference in the wood, but it is protected. So it's the least expensive, most environmentally friendly product that you can use for fire retardant treatment of a bridge or a house or anything. Anything made out of that's natural, wood, wool, paper, any of those things can be treated with no char.
Does it last for an indefinite amount of time, or does it have to be
Yeah,
put on
well,
again?
yeah, right. So two-prong effort. The biggest risk of fire is on the inside of the bridge because we've yet to find an arson who can fly and start a fire underneath the bridge or outside the bridge. So the main focus, both for economics and safety, is to treat everything that you can reach from inside the bridge. And since it's a covered bridge, this product carries a 30-year warranty, but it lasts indefinitely. You don't have to retreat it.
Okay.
Water is the only thing that can leach it out of the wood. So if there's no water getting to the wood, the retardant, lasts indefinitely.
Well, and that's important, especially in that area, because I know a few years prior the Slate Bridge had been destroyed by arson, and so I know that's a real concern for covered bridges.
Yeah, nationally, we average anywhere from 6 to 12 bridges lost to arson every year.
Wow. I don't understand that.
No, somebody's got to be real sick.
Yeah, I don't understand it. Well, so moving on, the abutments originally called for reinforcement with concrete, but as crews worked to correct the grade of the approaches, they found two large granite capstones that were buried in the fill. Can you talk a little bit about those?
Yeah, well, aside, one of the most enjoyable things about a covered bridge is the blues clues you find. Because if you spend enough time on a covered bridge, you're going to find out and can read what the original builders were intending.
Mm-hmm.
So we were discharged with removing the backfill. It had sagged, and there were potholes and everything on the asphalt approaches to the bridge. So we were instructed to take the fill down, the dirt underneath the asphalt down about 2 feet. We got very near the bottom. We found large, full-length stones, early hand-cut stones that just happened to be the same width as the roadway from insider truss to insider truss. So working with Hoyle Tanner, said, gee, wouldn't it be nice to set these back on granite back walls, just like the originals, and not use concrete, and then cap them with the granite.
Mm-hmm.
So they allowed it. We got them in place, and they're still in service there today. But anybody goes out to the bridge, when you step off the wood, you're going to see these huge, long pieces of granite.
Mm-hmm.
That's the enjoyable. I actually found a silver $50 from 1937 when we get down to the bottom of the excavation.
Oh, neat.
So I'm only supposing, because I don't have any credible evidence, that the bridge was raised at some point, because we found a layer of macadam, which is the old school asphalt with just tar and sand mixed together, down about, the 24, 28 inches. So it makes sense. I mean, you wouldn't see a layer down there, and there was a lot of cow manure down there. Let me tell you, it was good garden stuff we found down there. There was obviously the road height at some point in the bridge's life.
Interesting. Well, I wonder why I guess they would just be easier to cover those granite capstones than it would be.
Well, I suspect they
to
just
move
tossed
them.
them. They just tossed them tossed them out of the way and rebuilt what they had put in place,
Right.
and just foregoing the granite.
Right. Well, speaking of working in the river, I know there are special permits that you have to have in order to work in the waterway. Can you talk about that?
Well, they all start with the Army Corps of Engineers. They do they'll look at the impact, how much you're going to disturb the riverbed, how much fill you might need to put in there, or in the case of this contract, there was additional riprap, crushed stone to go around the pier to protect it. So the Army Corps take a look at it. The Hampshire Department of Environmental Services will take a look at it, and then you make the application for the permit, and hopefully it comes back. But we were working in unison with the water pipe removal and relocation. So all the heavy permits were taken out by the contractor who had to essentially dig up the bottom of the riverbed.
Okay.
And put the pipe there. So we had permits to put so many cubic yards of stone in there, which was part of our work, but the heavy lifting was already done by the water pipe contractor.
This isn't the only bridge that I've heard of a water line going through the bridge. Did people do that just because it was easier just to put the water line across the bridge, or did they not want to disturb the riverbed? Or
No, it was easier, cost effective. I mean, you've been around a lot. Well, you've been around most all these bridges.
Mhm.
If you ever look up top and see any glass insulators and some protruding holes at the portals, they sent telephone lines, power lines right through the bridge. They didn't set poles. They used the bridge as their utility access.
Yeah, you're right. Now that you mention that.
Yeah, you see little ceramic insulators in a drilled hole in the wood, and
Mm-hmm. Well, it just seems like what you said, the weight of having the water line go through a covered bridge would eventually take its toll.
yeah. And our cold winters, who wants a water line to break in the middle of the night? And then you got to go out there on a covered bridge.
Hmm.
Coldest place on earth is a covered bridge in the middle of the winter. I worked on several of them in the
I can
winter.
imagine. I can imagine. And it seems like the work goes on year round in the heat of the summer or the freezing cold during the winter.
Yeah, I mean, here, us hardy New Englanders, we don't like to shut down work for anything.
No.
So, and very few times you will ask for a suspension of work because of winter, but it's not like a concrete bridge. You're working with wood. Wood doesn't care if it's cold or warm. You
That's
got to
true.
work it. Yeah, Ashuelot, we didn't take a day off. We worked all through the winter.
Is that typical?
It is for me.
Yeah. Well, I would imagine once you start a project, you want to see it finished. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, you own it too. You're responsible for the bridge, so you're going to leave it vacant 2 weeks while you go skiing
true.
just because it's cold.
Exactly. So, during the excavation of the river bottom, a large timber beam was pulled from the mud. Can you tell us about that?
Oh, that was, yeah. The boys that were doing the water line insertion came across a submerged and partially buried a huge timber, 40 feet long, 14 feet wide, 16 inches deep, and it was hand hewn. But it wasn't sawn. It was crafted on site, and it resided mid span of one of the spans. So we can only hypothesize that it was used as a temporary derrick or temporary bridge support when they assembled the bridge originally.
Okay.
Because keep in mind, everything was cut on shore and then it was taken out over the river and then assembled there. That was the typical way to erect a bridge. So you needed a temporary props, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
up from the riverbed to do it.
Okay. And going back to something you said earlier, so you said that the bridge is a single span. The wood is single, but it rests on the center pier. Is that typical, or are some bridges two separate trusses attaching to the pier?
You'll see it both ways. Two bridges, two spans, one bridge, two spans. You see it about equal. You'll see it about equal. I mean, the advantage of having one bridge is that, well, what happens if the river gets ugly and you end up getting a whole bunch of trees knocking on the door? If you're connected over the pier, you've got a lot more resistance to blowing the bridge out and just sending it downriver.
Okay.
But as far as engineering analysis and stuff, two separate spans works a lot better.
And does the town trust lend itself to one or the other?
I don't think I'd be prepared to say either way. All I know is what was exhibited when we first got to the Ashuelot Bridge. There was a pretty serious hump at the pier, enough to cause a speed bump.
Hmm.
And it was from excess crushing in the bottom chord. Two bottom chords, two top chords. Both bottom chords showed distortion and crushing. And working with the engineer, we ended up displacing more of the load over a different area so that, hump wouldn't regenerate itself in future years.
Right. The completed project received the first ever Palladio Award for covered bridges in 2003. Can you talk a little bit about what that award is and who that came from?
Yeah, so one of the sponsors of the first National Covered Bridge Conference, which was held in Burlington, Vermont, Traditional Building Magazine, sponsored a competition, and they sent out their folks and some national park people and a host of individuals that were familiar with covered bridges, and they toured the country. And they selected which bridge would win the Palladio Award. So we were lucky to win it. Like I said, it's a beautiful bridge, considered to be pure American Gothic architecture. It's a village bridge, they gussied up. Now, sister bridge in town in Winchester, the Coombs Bridge, is a plain Jane. It's it's a service bridge.
Mm-hmm.
But here in Ashuelot, they really wanted to have something to hang their buntings on at 4th of July time.
Yes, they do, and they serve watermelon on the 4th of July. They've been doing that.
Oh yeah,
over 100 years, which is really neat. It's really neat. So my next question: do you have a favorite covered bridge?
Ashuelot.
Well, I'm glad that's your favorite because that's what we're talking about.
Well, she's beautiful. Two covered walkways.
Yeah.
It's purported that Nichols Power out of Vermont built it, even though they don't have any credible evidence or written evidence that he did. But this bridge just shows all the signs of a master. Just the upper lateral bracing, the double X's, and those details. I mean, the man, if he did build it or whoever did build it, they understood. They understood where the state of the art was with covered bridges at the time. So, yeah, very lucky to follow the master builder who built it.
I know I am grateful, and a lot of other people are grateful that when you worked on the bridge, you were mindful of that, and you tried to keep the original builder's bridge, and that's the piece about what I learned in this research about these covered bridges in our state is that just people care for them so much and really want to keep them the way that they were intended to be, and that's what makes them special, I think.
Well, maybe you don't know the old saying, so I'll tell you the old saying. So a gentleman proclaimed he had George Washington's axe, cherry tree fable.
Yes.
He said, I've changed the handle twice, and I've changed the bit, which is the cutting part, 3 times, but it's George Washington's axe. Now, is it? It's not. So when you lose historic fabric, you're losing the bridge.
Right. Well, we didn't lose any historic fabric in this bridge with the 85% original material.
Yep.
I think that's excellent. Any last comments or thoughts about the Ashuelot Bridge and the project?
No, I mean, they take state money, they take federal money. We've since held a second National Covered Bridge Conference a few years back out in Dayton, Ohio. And a couple of really good publications have come out from the National Park Service. One is giving more definitive direction on rehabilitating covered bridges. There's a lot of wonderful examples across the country, do's and don'ts. so that the owners of covered bridges can make a conscionable decision about the best way to preserve these bridges, not just rehabilitate them, but to preserve them at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's out there. It's in the Library of Congress. It's both publications available online.
Mm-hmm.
So anybody thinking about fixing their covered bridge really should start with those books first.
That is great advice. And I actually have a link to both of those on my website.
Super.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And that's the book I reference when people ask me specific engineering questions about covered bridges. I say, that is not my book. That's
Go to that book.
So please read those. That's not my wheelhouse, although I have learned a lot in the last 2 years.
Oh, I bet you have.
I have.
Well, thank you for writing your book.
Well, thank you. Thank you
It's
for
a
helping me.
long time coming. Well, New Hampshire DOT put out a book, which is a little informative, but it doesn't go into the depth of the history of each bridge like your book does.
Yeah.
So kudos to you.
I started with that book. Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, thank you for talking to me today. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Covered Bridges of New Hampshire is created by me and recorded in Hancock, New Hampshire. The song Old New Hampshire was arranged and performed by Josh Black. The introduction is courtesy of Greg Kretschmar. This podcast is a companion to my book, Covered Bridges of New Hampshire. You can find out more about the book, the podcast, blog posts, upcoming events, and an interactive covered bridge map at coveredbridgesnh.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Covered Bridges of New Hampshire. Please rate, review, and subscribe to or follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Kim Chandler. Thanks for listening.